click on.
Master your mindset. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hello and welcome to another session from Master Your Mindset, the 6th annual Global Summit from Coaching Minds. My name is Julie Blint and I'm an EMCC accredited transformational coach thanks to Coaching Minds and your host for the first 2 days of the summit. Joining me is Sharon Worth, a fellow EMCC practitioner coach specializing in neurodiversity and ADHD. Her session, Whose Voice Is That? Rewriting the Rules You Didn't Choose, explores the rules neurodivergent women can feel expected to follow, how to show up, which roles to fulfill, and the right way of doing things, while masking to fit into a neurotypical world. Sharon, welcome. And did I explain that well, or is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thank you. No, I mean, that's me in a nutshell, essentially. Yeah. And I'm delighted to be back this year. I spoke at last year's summit when we were talking about sparking our magic. And that's when I spoke about how coaching had really helped me. And then this year's topic is just so broad, isn't it? And what is quite amusing is that you and I managed to sort of pick the same topic, thinking we'd gone really niche.
I know. Great minds think alike.
but we've got very, very different stories around that. So yes, I'm going to be talking today about questioning some of the rules that we inherit, and yeah, I'm going to share a couple of personal stories as well. So shall I get started?
Yeah, I would just like to remind everyone that it's an interactive session, so please do write in the chat, and then we're going to have the question and answer section at the end as well. Okay, so Sharon, over.
Thank you. Yeah, and a quick apology from me as well. The reason we're late is because of my lack of technical ability. So because of that, I'm going to be asking Adele to move on to the next slide for me. So it's going to be like the COVID days again. Next slide, please. For anyone in the UK, you'll understand what I mean. Okay, so as I said, I'd like to talk a little bit about the rules we live by without ever really choosing them. And I'd like to start with a quick question to start us off. I'd like you to think of something that you did recently, maybe even today, something that you did because you felt you should. So not because you wanted to, not because it served you or because it was a choice, but because should showed up for you somewhere and you obeyed it. So I'm just going to give you a minute just to think about that, because it can be, I appreciate it's quite a tricky question to ask. Just give you some time to think about something that you did because you felt you should, not because you wanted to. And it might be something that you dislike or something that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable. But again, it's just something that you feel you should do. If anyone wants to, you're more than welcome to share it in the chat, or just hold it in mind, or maybe make a note of it. Whichever option you choose, we are going to come back to it later on. So we'll just move on to the next slide. Please, Adele. Hopefully Adele's there and she's heard me. We haven't got the second one up yet, I don't think. Okay, cool. Thank you. So you might still be thinking about it. That's fine. You might not come up with anything. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to just explain or tell you a little bit more about me very quickly, and why this sits so close to my heart. So I'm a neurodiversity coach. I tend to focus on supporting midlife women who discover their neurodivergence later in life, usually within the menopause transition, because that was my own lived experience. And really, that's a big part of what I coach on. So I've always had the attitude that it's not about having all the answers, but what I like to create is a space where people feel safe enough to be able to come up with their own solutions, their own answers, which of course aligns with the ethics of coaching. I myself was diagnosed with ADHD at 49, and then I discovered I'm also autistic at 51. And it was the menopause really that led me to discover these conditions. It was what caused quite an unraveling in me, but it's also what caused me to really start to understand myself. And today I've never really felt more certain of my place in the world than I do now. Since my discoveries, I've managed to write 2 books. I've qualified as a coach through Coaching Minds. And after completing my level 5 diploma, I went on and did a CPD in ADHD coaching. And I've also just finished a diploma in neurodiversity coaching. I now find myself working with late diagnosed women of all ages, not just those that are navigating menopause. Just to add to that, I'm also a mum of 3 neurodivergent adults. My 2 sons were diagnosed as children around the age of 8, and my daughter wasn't diagnosed until adulthood after years and years of being dismissed as she's just anxious. And this is depressingly common for girls and women, which is why so many of us are discovering it later on in life. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get into it. Rules. I'm just going to ask perhaps a show of hands or a thumbs up in the chat. How many of you would call yourself a rule follower? How many of you like to follow rules? And the reason I ask is because a rule, at its simplest, I suppose, is just an agreed way of doing something. It's like a boundary, or it's a message that says, oh, this is how we do things, this is how it's done. And there's nothing wrong with that, because rules give us clarity. And lots of autistic people, in fact, like rules. They're black and white and they're predictable. And that's quite important when you have an autistic brain. But not every rule was actually chosen. So most of them we actually inherited. And that might have been from family, from our culture, schooling, the workplaces that we've moved through. And for women in particular, there's an extra layer. So the version of womanhood that was modelled to us when we were young, we weren't really old enough to even question it. And then when you add fluctuating hormones across our entire lifetime into that mix, it's actually quite a lot to carry. So these inherited rules are often given the term life scripts. You've probably heard of that. We absorb them early and we can go on to perform them for a lifetime. And often we never question them. There's a really lovely story actually that illustrates this really, really well. And I don't know if anyone's heard of it. I think there's various versions of it floating around. But my husband told me about it actually just the other day. And it's a story of a pot roast or a roast dinner, you know, like a Sunday joint. And the story goes that a woman was making a Sunday roast and she cuts both ends off of the joint before she cooks it. And she does that because that's how her mum did it. And she asks her mum why. And her mum says, oh, because that's how your gran did it. So she asks her gran, who says, oh, because my pan was too small. So it wouldn't actually fit in the pan. So she just used to chop a bit off of each end to make it fit. Or there's another version of it where it wouldn't fit in the oven. So she had a smaller oven. But they just kept doing it because no one had ever really asked why in 3 generations. So another question for you. How many rules do you think you're still following just because that's how it's always been done? I'm just wondering if any spring signs, any sort of family traditions, any sort of, why do we do it that way? So just have a think, see if you can identify any of them. And then maybe at the end, some of you might like to share some of them. Could be quite entertaining. So my point here is that once something is inherited rather than chosen, it stops feeling like a preference and it actually starts to feel like a fact. And then this runs deeper. It runs deeper than just a few decades or a few generations. Certain expectations can really be traced back thousands of years to the start of the Bronze Age even. And versions of it actually show up in nearly every culture and every religion. And education is a good modern example of how slow that unpicking is, you know, how long it can take us to start to question and to maybe do things a little bit differently. In England alone, currently well over 1 million children are persistently missing school. And the system is still largely run on a Victorian model, or it's based on Victorian foundations. So many of these persistently absent children will actually be neurodivergent too. And I think, again, the point I'm trying to make is we're not quite getting it right because we're just doing it the way we've always done it. And, you know, many people have been shouting and petitioning for things to change, for provision to change, because there's so many kids falling through the gap. But that's me going off on a tangent nearly there. So I'll not continue on that tangent, but that's a good modern example. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So looking specifically at people or women who are neurodivergent, these scripts can weigh twice as heavily. So they were written not just without women in mind. So we're going back to the patriarchy, born in the Bronze Age, but also without the neurotypical wiring in mind either. So what a lot of us will have done is we masked, we adapted, and we performed the rules even harder. So we worked even harder at it because we would have assumed that we weren't trying hard enough. We would never have assumed that the script was never built for us in the first place. And that really is the double layer. So it was a rule book that was never ours. It was performed by a brain it was never designed around. And often for years before we even had the word neurodivergent to explain any of it. I hope I'm making sense here, but obviously we can explore any questions at the end. Next slide, please, Adele. Okay. So when we think about rules, I'd like to just talk about societal expectations a little bit. So what we perform every day to a neurotypical standard or to meet neurotypical expectations, a neurodivergent nervous system will really struggle with that. So it's where uncomfortable has consequences. I've got a background in healthcare and a background in health and fitness, and I'm really interested in how stress affects the body. And many of the women that I coach arrive exhausted or in burnout. They have often left jobs or lost jobs. They're battling anxiety. They might be battling addiction. They might feel this sort of sense of failure because they felt that they should be coping, but actually they just aren't. They just haven't got the capacity for it anymore. And often, as I said earlier, menopause is kind of like the catalyst for it all kind of falling apart. So these statistics that I'm sharing, they're not small numbers, and they're also not about being fragile. Researchers actually point to modifiable risk factors and unmet support, not any innate weakness. So a huge part of this is chronic stress. It's the fight or flight response. And the fight or flight response was built for short emergencies, not for being switched on for years and years. And so many neurodivergent people avoid getting help at all because getting seen by a GP or a specialist so often feels like its own battle. Who here has ever put off getting help because the process itself felt exhausting? And those of you in the UK will probably understand what I mean here. Trying to get an appointment with a GP is quite hard. You've got to go through this sort of online triage service, or you might only get a phone call. You might not get a face-to-face appointment. You might have quite a wait. And these are barriers to any person, let alone a neurodivergent person. And I suppose really this leads me to my call to action, really, that we need more inclusivity and less judgment. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to move on just to a couple of stories. This is a very basic example, but I thought it was quite a good one. Let's try and just bring a life script to life. So there was a rule that I brought into my family, my household, that felt completely unquestionable. And that was that we should all sit at the table and eat together. And that was very much inherited from my own childhood. We always had dinner together. And it was just the correct way of doing things. It was the correct version of family life as I understood it. And it's what you see in the media as well. Families sitting down, talking about their day and conversing and being normal. But one of my children couldn't tolerate a busy, noisy kitchen, couldn't tolerate the sounds and the sight of other people eating. Certain smells and textures were very difficult as well. So these are all kind of sensory needs, sensory processing issues. He was only ever really calm eating on his own, in his own space. How many of you have a should around family mealtimes? Even if it doesn't quite work for everyone at the table. I'm just curious. So it might be that you share something in the chat, or you might want to save it until the end. But it's just a question, because I'm just wondering how many families, might struggle with this, and yet we kind of force it. So coming back to my own situation, against all the advice and the expectations, we dropped the rule and we had no more meltdowns, and there was no more forcing anyone into a ritual that wasn't serving them. That child is 25 now, and he still prefers eating alone. He runs on a very different circadian rhythm. He's just very different, and we are all very different. And what I needed to do in that situation was actually just give myself permission to break a rule, if that makes sense. So it didn't feel like the right thing to do, it felt like the wrong thing to do. I could see that doing so, not only was he suffering, we were all suffering as a family. We tried lots of different things, and actually we just needed to drop it and let go, and everything changed. And I think that was probably the beginning of my learning around starting to question things and starting to advocate for my children. And I'm going to come on to and how I've advocated for myself in the next slide. So if you wouldn't mind, Adele. Thank you. Just doing a quick time check. Okay, so yes, the second place that these rules started to get broken was a lot closer to home as well. After years of masking and pushing through, I started to make some small changes myself. I was finally able to start asking myself some really big questions. And some of these changes were really, really small. So, for example, if I go to a restaurant, I usually, when I'm booking, actually, will put a note on the booking form just to say that I'd like a quiet table, quiet corner. I don't want to be sat under a speaker. And I often will choose a table as well where I've got my back to the wall, because I just really struggle with any kind of movement behind me as well. And it's just all these little things that I started to notice, that if I just ask for a modification, or if I just ask for what I need, I can enjoy the experience rather than being constantly on edge all of the time. I hope that makes sense. I'm just wondering if you would all think for a moment if there's one small thing that you could start asking for that might make your life more comfortable or less stressful. Now, self-advocacy itself is not a switch that you flip once. Just last week, I pushed through a funeral, and I stayed longer than I should have done. I should have left earlier, but I pushed through because I felt like it was expected, and I also just didn't want to be seen as rude. It actually cost me days of recovery afterwards. So old habits do actually die hard, and I am learning all the time. So I haven't got it all nailed. I don't get it right all of the time. But every time I sort of slip back into that people-pleasing mode, or I should do this, I should do that, I learn from it. I usually learn the hard way, but that's how we all learn, isn't it? We learn through making mistakes. There are other, interesting little examples that I could bring in here, such as, I work with a client at the moment who really, really values her own space, and so does her partner. They're getting married, engaged to be married, but for them, it's not just separate beds or separate bedrooms, it's separate homes. And that's okay too. It's actually okay to flip the conventional into the unconventional. It's okay to, go a little bit against the grain, a little bit against the norm, if that's what works for you and if you're both happy with it. So, I just thought I'd share that as an example, because, we think there's a right way to be in a relationship as well. If I can have the next slide, please. Okay. So something that I would really like you to leave with today isn't a theory, it's a tool. And the next time you catch yourself thinking, I should, you could ask yourself 2 questions. So the first one is, whose voice is that really? Is it mine? Or is it a parent's, a teacher's? Is it from an old boss? Or is it's something that comes from a culture that was never built for me and for my mind? And the second question is it even true? Is there any truth in it? Is it true for me right now? So 2 questions, and then take a moment to go back to the should that you thought of or noticed at the start of the session. Maybe just sit with it for a minute and just ask those questions. See what you can identify. Where did it come from? And is it true? And again, if anything comes up that you'd like to share in the chat now or later, feel free, or just keep it to yourself, whatever you're comfortable with. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so before I start drawing to a close, I just want to widen the lens a little bit. So these 2 questions, they aren't just for neurodivergent people. They're useful for anyone who's carrying a rule that they never chose. We're all different and we all deserve to live in a way that feels authentic, in a way that feels comfortable. So that doesn't actually mean you don't ever leave your comfort zone, because we know that we grow through leaving our comfort zone. We know that we need to challenge ourselves in order to grow. But sometimes, and particularly for neurodivergent people, the real challenge is actually questioning the rule itself. And again, overriding a nervous system that's in that sort of fight or flight state. It's not just uncomfortable, it really does have a real cost on longevity, on our health, on our well-being, which is exactly why we need to bring in more inclusivity and less judgment. If I could just have the next slide, please. So we start small, we start with 1 rule. And please don't get me wrong here. This isn't about throwing every rule out. We're not all going to suddenly just, join an anarchist movement, but some are genuinely worth keeping, of course. for safety, for boundaries, for those black and white reasons, for those parameters that I talked about at the beginning. So really, the invitation is to start very, very small with just one rule. Start asking that question: whose voice is that? Is it true? And that's actually enough just to begin rewriting it, just to begin to adapt for comfort. And also, don't be afraid to ask why. Go deeper. We've got the deeper model introduced in the level 5 diploma here at Coaching Minds. Brilliant. Just why. Children ask why all the time, don't they? To an annoying level. but actually, we need that curiosity. We do need to go deeper. We need to go deeper than the first answer. One of my favorite sayings is there on the slide. It's nothing changes if nothing changes. So we've got that responsibility to make life a little bit easier for ourselves. If I could just have the final slide. Yeah. So it was just a thank you really now. Thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for giving this topic some thought. If you'd like to get in touch, you can head to my website. It's sharonworthcoaching.com. You'll also find me on all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. And I think we now have, plenty of time for any discussion, any questions, or an opportunity to share any of the rules that you might have identified or might be choosing to question. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Hi. So thank you so much for such an interesting session there. While we're waiting for some of the questions to come in the chat, which can come through LinkedIn, YouTube, or perhaps on the Coaching Minds Hub. I'm not sure you can write questions there, though. But I'd like to start by asking you, where do you think people should begin this process? What would be the first step?
I think it comes down to personal choice. And it's not an easy process, I have to say, speaking from personal experience. I think I only really gave myself permission to start asking some of these questions when I started to understand how my brain worked. I started to identify that that things were really, really hard work for me. I'd never understood why. And then when I got my diagnoses, it all kind of made sense. And I was then able to identify what is happening in my life, what tasks am I doing, what rituals am I performing, what sort of daily chores, whatever it is, what am I putting myself through that is actually really quite uncomfortable and almost painful and intolerable, but I kept on pushing through and feeling exhausted as a result. So it is very personal, but I suppose a good question you could start with is, do I like this? And that sounds really, really basic, but do I like this? Or how does this serve me? Or how is this helpful? Is this helpful? So there's lots of different questions that you could start to ask yourself. And initially you might not even know the answer, because in all honesty, when I first sort of set out on this journey of discovery, I didn't really know. I didn't know what I liked and what I didn't like. So I did have to go deep with the why. What am I feeling in my body? What does that represent? What could that be? How would it feel if I didn't do that? Or how would it feel if I did it differently? Yeah.
So a lot of people talk about masking in autism, but I think not a lot of people tend to think about masking in ADHD or other neurodivergent things. So from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you discovered that you had been masking for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And masking is equally common in ADHD, because what an undiagnosed ADHD person will do is try and perform everything to neurotypical standards. And so, for example, it can be something really, really simple, like composing an email, which would typically take a neurotypical person, let's say 5 minutes. It's a fairly straightforward email, let's say. For somebody with ADHD who's worried about spelling, if they're making sense, or are they going into too much detail? Are they going to offend anyone? Are they getting their point across? There's lots and lots of overthinking, lots of drafting and redrafting. So what should take 5 minutes or would typically take a typical person 5 minutes could take 20 minutes or even days, because actually you might get distracted whilst you're typing it and 3 days later realize it's still in your draft and you haven't sent it.
Well, mine tends to remain in my head for 3 days before it gets out of my head. Or sometimes it never gets out of my head, and I think I've sent it, but I haven't.
Yeah. Or you've read a message and you've thought that you've replied to it, and in your head you have, but actually in reality you haven't. Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions coming in the chat. The first one is, how do you differentiate it from the normal pain that we experience while growing? I believe that's going to refer to the idea that when we're teenagers, we're trying to sort of adapt to the world and like individuate and rebel against our parents. So how maybe it's talking about how you can differentiate when you're really sort of uncomfortable with something, or I don't know if Razan is still there. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what you were asking there. Any thoughts, Sharon?
I didn't quite catch the beginning of that. Sorry, you cut out slightly for me.
So it's how do you differentiate it from the normal pain that we're experiencing while growing?
Okay. Yeah, I assume that means as in growing as a person.
She's added there, every growth comes with heaviness.
Yeah. Yes, it does. Yes. We do, as I was saying earlier, we do have to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. I think the difference is, and it's very difficult to explain, because it is going to be very, very different for every individual person as well. The difference is that it's manageable, and it's not gonna that fight or flight isn't going to be switched on. I suppose the difference is, yes, anxiety is perfectly normal. We're going to feel anxious about doing something differently or doing something new or doing something that feels scary. We're going to feel that fear. We're going to feel that anxiety. The difference is that is experienced day in, day out with someone who is masking or trying to do what society wants us to do day in, day out. And it really does have it's chronic. It does have such a huge impact on an overloaded nervous system, because it's not just doing something uncomfortable every now and then. It's doing something uncomfortable on a daily basis, not realizing that actually what I could do is just ask for an accommodation here or ask for an adaptation here. And it shows up everywhere, you know, whether that's in your workplace, whether that is within your own family unit, whether that's with friends. And I'm starting to do more and more of that now, but it's very, very difficult. And it can feel very exposing. You can feel very vulnerable. There's a fear that you won't be taken seriously, or that people will think you're being dramatic. And I think this is the problem with, particularly with invisible disabilities, is that, you know, people can't see how painful things are for you, how difficult things are for you. My entire life has changed. The way that I live my life has completely changed, but I am still growing as a person. I'm growing in the ways that I can tolerate growing. I hope that in some way answers the question.
We have another question from Jane, which is, in your experience, what was the feeling after you realized a rule was not really your voice and breaking it?
What was the feeling? Was that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. After you realized the rule was not your voice.
Oh gosh, it's a really light feeling. It's like a weight coming off of your shoulders, actually. Quite freeing. And it almost has a bit of a snowball effect. Every day within our family, you know, one of us is saying, why does it always happen that way? Why does it always have to happen that way? Why do we do it this way? And, you know, it feels quite healthy. It feels healthy and it feels freeing. Yeah, that's probably the best way I can describe it.
Okay. Any other questions out there? Or Razan, did we answer the question okay? Jane?
Did anyone identify any rules that they might like to question themselves?
I do think it's a really important topic, hence why mine is quite similar, but I'm very happy to say it is a lot different as well. But it comes from that sort of same premise of questioning things and not just accepting what we're told or what we sort of grew up with. And I do think that is very important, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent, or you have no idea if you're neurotypical or not. But I know you work a lot with women in particular. So what do you think is even more difficult in terms of those rules that women are taught when they're young?
Specifically, just for women in general, do you mean? Are you still there, Julie?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. So
Sorry.
Just for women in particular, because I know you work a lot with women.
I do. Yeah. I work with women who are discovering neurodivergence later on in life. I think in terms of, we've come a long way, haven't we, as women, but I still think we've got a long way to go. I think there is still within us this belief that, you know, we should always, you know, we should be able to multitask. We should be able to keep all the plates spinning. We should put other people first. You know, I remember seeing a woman literally in a restaurant quite recently with a baby attached to breast, standing over her older child, cutting up the dinner, and sorry, this is I don't mean to sound sexist here, but I just found it infuriating because husband or dad or partner was just sort of sat there eating his own dinner. No, I think that's it. As women, sometimes, you know, we feel that we have to do everything, and that, you know, we should be the ones in control. And we've just adopted this role of, yes, I can be a mum, I can be a carer, I can sort out the finances, I can look after a home, I can have a career. But actually, you know, what is the cost of that? The cost of that is flipping heck. By the time you get to midlife, you are absolutely exhausted. And also, we're expected to perform this role in a very linear, consistent fashion without taking into account the huge rise and fall in our hormones every month with our monthly cycle. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and Jane has also says that she can think of a couple of rules that she will question, especially in this season, as she's a new mum herself, and she thanks you for that.
Oh, thank you, Jane.
And then Razan also says, so true, I see superhero women everywhere. In terms of questioning whose voice is it, one of the things that I think I'm very lucky for is that I moved countries very early in my life. And then when I kept moving countries, that's where you see things done in a different way and see different societal or cultural rules. So you really get to understand from doing that what is you and what is the voice that society, family, and all those things that you mentioned have sort of tried to imprint on us. So I do feel quite lucky in that way, because I think that really helped me sort of question all those things or understand or sort of pick and choose what I liked. I think
I don't know. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
No.
I did miss some of that. Sorry, the connection keeps breaking up. So was there a question in there, or that was you talking about your experience of traveling and different
living? I've lived in a lot of different cultures. So from living in other different cultures, you really do start to question what is truly yours, what you truly like, what you truly want. And almost like I'm privileged, I think, in that way.
Yeah.
So in terms of your work with neurodivergent people, do you specialize only with people with ADHD, possibly going through the menopause, or do you have any other clients in particular that you enjoy working with?
Well, interestingly, since I've done my coach training in ADHD coaching and my neurodiversity diploma, I am getting inquiries from women of all ages, and yeah, it's great, because as I said right at the beginning, so many girls are missed or misdiagnosed, partly because the stereotypes are based on boys and the diagnostic criteria is based on boys and men. A lot of women are missed and then only really discover it in adulthood. So yes, I'm working with late discovery neurodivergent women, but some of them are needing support with organising their lives and getting through university, because again, you know, it's another system where it's a kind of one-size-fits-all approach, although universities in particular are pretty good at providing adaptations and reasonable adjustments. But yeah, it can be really, really tough, and a lot of people with ADHD will start a degree and not finish. And coaching can make a real difference. For people with ADHD, my psychiatrist has always said, medication doesn't just work in isolation. Medication plus coaching is actually really, really helpful. Yeah, because you can have the medication to help with the focus, but you need to work on mindset as well.
I think one of the biggest problems with diagnosis of ADHD is the H. Because everybody thinks about it as hyperactivity, and a lot of the women especially don't have that sort of hyperactivity, or have it in a different way that isn't that they can't sit still. So I think that's could be one of the reasons. Would you agree with me there? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of it is internalized with women. I would describe it as, an internal hyperactivity is just the constant thoughts. There's no switch off. But also we're very good at hiding it. So I am actually hyperactive as well. I've managed it throughout my lifetime by doing lots and lots of exercise. Actually today I not fidget too much. But it can be very subtle, like skin picking, or a lot of clients will have fidget toys when we have our sessions. I've got a chair that I can move around in. Sometimes I, sit on a Swiss ball and have a little bounce every now and then. So it's just more subtle rather than I think one of the questions in the assessment criteria is, do you just get up and leave your chair for no reason? And I just want to scream at that one, because no, I'm an adult and I know that I know not to do that. But I do feel like I need to move, but I can do it subtly. So, it's a strategy that we've developed, and it's because girls are generally, we like to be a bit more compliant and do as we're told. Yeah.
Some girls, not all of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, the old name for it was ADD, attention deficit disorder, and then it got changed to ADHD to sort of encompass everything. And again, with the ADD, that's more of a sort of a lack of concentration, where you get carried away by all your new thoughts and new things to think about, or overthinking.
Lots of different types of ADHD, and you may have heard the saying, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. It's the same with ADHD. There's always going to be commonalities, but we're all very, very unique, and that's one of the inclusive factors when you're working with neurodivergent people, is you make it very neuroaffirming and very, very individual, and accessible for all.
Again, neurodivergence isn't just autism, and it isn't just ADHD. There's lots of different types, spectrums and things, and this is why it gets really, really confusing.
It can do. Yeah, it can do. Yeah, I mean, dementia is another form of neurodivergence. I even like to think that menopause is a form of neurodivergence, because the brain really does go through a lot of change, and it recalibrates. It recalibrates at puberty. It recalibrates during perimenopause. It recalibrates during pregnancy. So it's going through changes, and that does make us think and feel and behave differently. So, hence the term neurodiversity. We are very diverse beings.
Yeah.
It can be a minefield, but one thing I am is an advocate for just raising awareness of neurodiversity and neurodivergence.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your session.
Thank you.
Then next up, in 1 hour's time, we'll have Jesse Jackson for his session called 3 Tools for the Mind. So the mechanism for thinking, when your mind works against you. To go grab that drink, a bite to eat, or nip to the loo. And then we'll see you all again in 1 hour's time. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Julie and Adele.
Bye.